Hey, I'm Kamali, taking you through the stories people are talking about and sharing around the world on Newsfeed today. Should white South African farmers be given asylum in Australia for their safety? Syria didn't always look like this. After 7 years of war, we show you how it was before. WeCheck claims the Indian government is trying to rewrite history. And this is why they say you should never work with children or animals. At the top of our newsfeed today, and a question: are white South African farmers a persecuted minority in need of asylum abroad? An Australian politician seems to think so. His name is Peter Dutton, and more about him in a moment. First, a quick history lesson. Colonialism and apartheid left an overwhelming amount of the best farmland in white hands in South Africa. Now, most of these are now large commercial enterprises. With the end of apartheid in the 90s and the coming to power of the African National Congress, the need for fertile farmland to be distributed fairly among all was clear. But so is maintaining food supplies. Now, wholesale expropriation of farmland was attempted across the border in Zimbabwe with disastrous consequences. People died, white farmers were attacked, and the economy plummeted. South Africa can't repeat those mistakes. Now, with some in the white farming community in South Africa say they're scared that the new government of Cyril Ramaphosa will take their lands by force. Others have seen an increase in violent crime. And now this Aussie immigration minister has offered to take them in. All right, well, David Mann is a human rights lawyer and advocate and the executive director of Refugee Legal in Australia joins us now. David, thank you so much for joining us. But that kind of asylum request for persecution, of course, happens all over the world. War refugees are granted political asylum all the time. South African farmers being persecuted, surely there are other people in South Africa who may well need asylum in countries like Australia.
There may be. The government has already flagged, the Australian government has already flagged, there might be other types of ways of, issuing visas, other types of visas that could be issued to South African farmers. And the question is whether, in this context, South African farmers should be considered to be people who are in need of protection because they're being targeted, in need of protection because they are facing persecution, and whether the government, whether their own government, is willing or able to protect them. But this bigger question, this overarching question here, which has raised significant controversy here and abroad, is also the question not of whether Australia has capacity to take more people who are at risk around the world, because Australia does. The question is, who should Australia take? And that is a very complex and difficult question for Australia and other countries that do provide resettlement.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? And that's what people looking in, like me, see as the irony. You've got Papua New Guinea, a central prison camp for people who are desperate to come to Australia, who are not allowed in the country, and yet you've got this immigration minister suggesting that white farmers from South Africa should be allowed to come.
Let's start with this very point, though, about the white farmers. I think it's really important to start with the question first of whether they do need protection or not, as I've said. If they do need protection, Australia and other countries should be concerned. But we do then look at the situation of Australian policy having essentially exiled, forced people from Australia to be held in inhumane and cruel conditions on Nauru, and in Papua New Guinea, as you've mentioned, in situations for years on end. And Australia has refused to resettle them to Australia, despite the fact that they have been ruled to be refugees. They've been recognised as refugees. Who should get those scarce places? And the controversy here is whether or not white South African farmers should be given that priority.
Well, Crystal Alderson is a journalist based in Cape Town. Let's get a South African view on this. Crystal, good to speak to you. So do South African farmers, white South African farmers, need asylum in Australia?
Good afternoon. I think it has to be looked part of the broader context in the debate that's happening in South Africa right now is the expropriation of land without compensation. Now, yesterday, President Cyril Ramaphosa said that this has to happen as a matter of urgency. However, he said that there cannot be any grabs and any violence associated with that expropriation. Now, Parliament had voted overwhelmingly in favor of changing the constitution to allow for that expropriation. Now, Agri-SA, which is the main farming lobby group, says that this is causing anxiety within the farming community. South Africa is the breadbasket in Southern Africa and provides food to the rest of the continent. So, of course, it's creating anxiety amongst white farmers. Coupled to that, just 1 hour ago, a report emerged of another farmer being killed in the Western Cape. So there is also the issue of violence, and that farmers have come under attack, and that's part of the violent nature that we see that's happening on farms across the country. So those are the two issues at play at the moment. But of course, there's anxiety for white farmers who are still the majority owners of land in South Africa. And of course, the majority black people are feeling that they need land to also have their share of the productive land of South Africa. And that's the emotive issue at the moment. Now, the part of the broader context that we saw in the early 90s with the change from the apartheid state to the ANC government, that a lot of white South Africans had in fact immigrated to Australia. So there's anxiety. We've not heard yet, of course, how many cases or people have applied for asylum to South Africa, but clearly the organized agricultural bodies are saying that their farmers and their members are feeling anxious.
And Crystal, I mean, anxious, you say, but you've just told us that someone was killed on a farm, a white farmer was killed just today. That anxiety is real.
Absolutely, because what we do find is that there's been violent attacks on farmers. I've spoken to farmers across the country, and they say that despite having spent their own money forming security commandos with other farmers, they're not getting help from the South African police services. So that is part of the challenge, is that they're saying they're not receiving the help. And on the other hand, we hear the South African policing services saying that it's such vast tracts of land. There's no way that they can have a policeman on every farm in South Africa. And that is the contestation of the debate in South Africa. You know, of course, South Africa has a violent history. We can't run away from it, and a violent past. And that's all coming into play in terms of the broader socioeconomic issues in South Africa, where the majority of black people are unemployed and looking for food. And that comes into play in terms of the violence that we see, not just on farms, but also in different levels and layers in South African society.
Absolutely. Okay, Crystal, in Cape Town, thank you so much. All right, let's take you to what else is trending on social media. Now, Drizzy has been on Twitch playing Fortnite with Ninja. Do try and stay with me. The rapper has been online playing video games with a guy who plays games online for a living. And it set a record for the most concurrent viewers on the site. 600,000 people around the world watching guys play games online. 2018. Apartment space is so scarce in Hong Kong that an architect is suggesting this: living in an old water pipe. Seriously. And a Burger King crown for the man of the match, Franco Armani, after River Plate won the Argentinian Super Cup. Times must be tough for the Argentinian Football Association, or they just really like Whoppers. Now, it's been 7 years to the day since the Syrian war began. 7 years of death and destruction, but it wasn't always like that. Let's take a look at what Syria used to be and what it's become. the government of Narendra Modi in India has been accused by some of trying to rewrite history. Here's Shrishti to explain.
Are all Indians Hindus? Some politicians from India's Hindu Nationalist Party, the BJP, believe so.
I would like the Muslims to accept that their ancestors are Hindus and therefore we are brothers and sisters.
They're only echoing the voice of the RSS, the ideological wing of the BJP. They say ancestors of all people of Indian origin, including its 172 million Muslim citizens, were once Hindu.
हिंदुत्व ये हमारे राष्ट्र की पहचान है.
So do the Hindu nationalists want to rewrite history to back this Hindutva ideology? A Reuters investigation reveals that the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi had set up a committee of scholars discreetly in January last year. Their main agenda? To use archaeological findings and DNA tests to prove that today's Hindus have directly descended from the land's first inhabitants thousands of years ago. They also want to make a case that ancient Hindu scriptures are fact, not myth. They hope to add this Hindu-first version of Indian history to school curriculums and academic research. Now here's what's more worrying. In most cases, the research is done first and the conclusions are published later. But in this case, it seems to be the other way around. Interviews with the committee members and minutes from their meetings have shown that they'll work backwards, making it more like a fact-finding mission. So is the idea of India changing under Prime Minister Modi? Constitutionally, India is a secular nation. It takes pride in its democracy that gives equal rights to all of its citizens. India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, stressed on inclusiveness. He wrote in one of his books that it's entirely misleading to refer to Indian culture as Hindu culture. But this ideology has been challenged in the recent years. BJP-governed states have made changes to history textbooks, which the opposition says is saffronizing education. Roads and railway stations named after Muslim kings were re-christianed in some places. Critics have also accused the Hindu Nationalist Party of threatening India's diversity. Some of them feel that any attempt to establish Hindus as a dominant race infringes on the rights of its other communities. Narendra Modi's 2014 election campaign was built around Achhe Din, which literally means good days, a promised bright future. But why then is his party hung up on the past?
All right, let's go around the world now for some other stories you need to know this Thursday. A woman who shot and killed her boyfriend and posted the video on YouTube has been given 6 months in prison. Mona Lisa Perez was asked by her boyfriend to shoot him in the chest. He was holding a book that was 1.5 inches thick. He thought it would stop the bullet. Students across the United States walked out of class for 17 minutes to protest the government's lack of action on gun reform. The 17 minutes represents the 17 people who died at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida on February the 14th. And have you drunk from a plastic bottle today? If so, you may have consumed as many as 10 particles of plastic, each larger than the width of a human hair. They were found in bottles made by all the major brands, and the World Health Organization says they're reviewing the implications. Now, when I was a kid, the best my barber could do was put a night tick in the back of my head. Why I wanted that at the time, I don't know. But these barbers in Egypt are taking it to a whole nother level by putting the country's current footballing god into hair.
فاشتغلت على نفسي واتعلمت وبقيت اتدرب كتير وجبت رسامين اصحابي قلت لهم انا عايز اعمل فكره مجنونه اللي هو ايه اعمل شغل الاب نورمال بس اب نورمال مختلف بشكل
And finally, baby Panda. As you can see, this little one, there he is just in the back of shot at Chengdu Research Center in China, is giving her keeper all sorts of grief. She's clearly just trying to get out the bamboo for the panda to eat, and yet the little guy will not let her work. That's why you should never work with animals, but also, I mean, working with baby pandas must be Pretty good. Love baby pandas. All right, that's all from the Newsfeed team. You can reach us on Twitter. I'm at Kamali Melbourne. Find us 24/7 on YouTube and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and add. I will see you tomorrow.